All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our workshop on the commercial cannabis use business license process. I'm Teresa Gallivan, the interim city manager, and we thought it was really important to take time today to offer this workshop so that you have an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have about the application process. Hopefully you've downloaded the application. If not, I believe we have some in the back. On the table back there. So you can go ahead and look at the application, and we have some other paperwork back there that we are sharing with folks. Just the application. And the resolution and ordinance, copies of that are also back on the back table if you would like a copy of those. We also have a sign-in sheet right outside the front door, so if you haven't had a chance to sign in yet, please do. We'd like to stay in touch with folks, and that way we can continue to share information as we go through this process. This is very new for everybody, and we know that there's going to be information that we continue to learn from the state and as we move forward. So. Also, we launched our cannabis webpage. We did put a page on our website that has a lot of information, and that will continue to be something that we will update. So it's a resource for you to look at as we continue through this process. And I'd like to now introduce our partners in this. We are now working with SCI Consulting, Neil Hall and Chris Coulter. And they are helping us through the application process as consultants for the city. I think that they are going to be a great part of this team to help make this an efficient and effective process for everybody. So, and we have other folks here that will help from various disciplines to answer any questions. Our city attorney, Joe Pannoni, Brian Halverson, our planning manager, and many other city staff here on the team that can also help if there are specific questions in their area of discipline. So with that, I'd like to turn it on over to Neil to walk us through the workshop.
Thank you, Teresa. Welcome, everybody. As we've told, we're working with about between 25 and 30 different cities and counties now on various stages of cannabis implementation. And I wish I could tell you we have this thing down perfectly and it's going to be perfectly smooth. You won't have any problems. You'll all have your permits in 2 weeks. But I promise you it's not going to go that simply. There just is not a model for us to do this with. So what we bring is some experience working with other cities that have gone through this before, other cities that are involved in the process. We welcome your questions, your comments. We're looking forward to working through this process with you. And this is kind of a relaxed atmosphere here today. We're going to do a brief presentation, but then we'll want to answer your questions. And if we don't have an answer, we'll get an answer and get back to you. You'll find we're very responsive. You can find SCI Consulting Group on the website. We only work with public agencies. We do not work with the industry. However, we seek input from anybody who's in the industry because you have hands-on knowledge. Before we get started, can I see a show of hands? How many of you are here because you're interested in retail, dispensary type of activities? Okay, it looks like about half. How many here are cultivators? Okay, and how many manufacturers? Any distributors in the group? You can raise your hand again if you are, yeah. And what about testing? Anybody from a testing lab here? That's going to be the big, really the kind of the oh, we got somebody from a testing lab? No. Wait. Type 9, yeah, is a non-storefront delivery-only dispensary, and we'll call that retail for now, so thank you. Yeah, testing is going to be kind of the
Neil,
one area that'll be tough. Yeah.
And when you're going to ask a question, wait for the microphone to come over so we can have it on record. Or you can come up to the microphone up here. Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and start with the PowerPoint. If I can. Where's the screen? Right behind me? Okay. Chris, you want to go ahead and start that? So go ahead. There we go. Okay, so what we're looking at are the retail dispensaries, commercial cultivation, manufacturing, both volatile and non-volatile. How many of you manufacturers are looking at volatile manufacturing? Okay, it's the most efficient process for manufacturing that we're aware of. distributing, processing, storing, staking, testing, all of the different activities. As you know, as a manufacturer, if you're a type 7 manufacturer, you can do type 6, you can do the N and the P type as well. Go ahead, Chris, to the next one. This is, and Brian, feel free to chime in on this, but this is the, these show the buffers for the activities. Those areas that are in the blue are areas that would be blocked out. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, I am getting a lot of calls from people, and I appreciate it. It seems like I've been the designated person to receive the calls on this buffer map, but that's okay because we are here to help. So if you were in those little blobs of the blue, you would not be able to have a cannabis-related business. The areas that are highlighted are parcels that are not within 600 feet of a daycare, youth center, or a school. So that is the map continues to change as we get more information, and the attorney has brought that to our attention. But that's really going to be an important map to look at because you're not going to want to submit an application if you're inside those blue blobs. So I do have some business cards available if you want to contact me because we look at those maps continuously.
Thanks, Brian.
Neil, if I could just add, and the reason there's two maps, can I have that pointer? The reason there's two maps is because, as you see, the one on the right, it says no dance studios. Currently, this map includes dance studios that are prohibited youth centers. And there's going to be a discussion tomorrow night on the council meeting on whether or not youth centers or whether or not dance studios fall into the youth center category. So as you can see over here, there's dance studio, and over here, there's more area available if dance studios are included. Just wanted to explain why there's two maps.
Thank you, Joe. Chris, you want to go ahead and move this to the next one? So on the commercial cannabis use license application, and what I'd like to do is we'll go through the presentation here and then open it up to questions after. So if you can hold your questions and make a note at this point. These are the types of information that we'll be wanting on the application form. If you've had a chance to look at it, you've seen a lot of this stuff. Typically, property owner consent is going to be very important. If you're not the property owner, you're going to want a notarized statement from the property owner indicating they're aware of what the business will be used for. You're going to need to tell us which cannabis businesses you have had in the past 5 years and your employment for the past 5 years. Any litigation, obviously we're looking to see, are the people that have a felony in the last 5 years for some type of cannabis related business activity. Okay, we're looking at that. We'll be looking at the type of business operation plan that you have. Again, you're going to be submitting most of this stuff to the state anyway, so there's very little that is not already included in the state regulations. An odor abatement plan, your disposal, your waste procedures for getting rid of your cannabis, almost everybody will have that. Inventory control, how you're going to do your employee screening, all your record keeping activities. And again, there's not anything really in there that is not going to already be required by the state. Typically, most of this will be required on your annual application for the state. Your proposed supply chain, and again, it's saying your proposed supply chain. We know that you probably won't have an actual supply chain until you start your business. The procedure for chemicals and fertilizers, if you're manufacturing, how you're going to store those volatile compounds. And those rules and regulations are important because safety is, as you know from SB 94, the #1 priority in passing Prop 64 was the safety of all the citizens. So your fertilizer usage, your pesticide usage, how you store your hazardous chemicals, that's all very important, not only to the state, but to the city of Lompoc. Site plan, your operations and security plan, your, how you're going to restrict youth access, and testing, transportation, packaging, and labeling criteria. Can you hold the question just until we get to the end, or is there something?
Wait, sir. Yeah. Sir, wait.
Oh, sure. Is the presentation you're showing available on the website or on your website or what?
We can make that available. And this is all in the application, which is available on the website.
Yeah, and if you haven't been to the website, it's very robust. I checked it this morning. I was extremely impressed. Go ahead to the next one, Chris. Yeah, your applicant authorization, indemnification, your certification, all of these things, again, are typically included in your state license. You're going to have to sign and fill out all of that same information when you go to the state. So there's nothing in this that really so far that, other than some of the odor control requirements may be a little bit different, but most of this will be included in your state application. Chris, do you want to kind of walk us through this?
So here we have sort of like a visual flow chart, so to speak, of the way the applications are going to flow through the city's process. Obviously, you're going to start with submitting everything as well as the deposit to the city clerk's office. We have laid it all out here. You can kind of see some of the ways around. There's 3 stages. The first stage is going to be an initial CEQA review. We'll also be conducting zoning verification, verifying some of those parcels that you saw on the original 2 maps that were supplied. If at any point there's anything in the application that it's missing, you'll be notified and you'll have a chance to resubmit. Once you make it through stage 1, the sort of preliminary checks, we'll be conducting a review of all the sections of the application and submitting a report based on our findings, confirming compliance with state laws and regulations, as well as the city's own local code. And the city at that point in the stage 3 process is just going to distribute to all the interested departments within the city. As you can see, there's several, and the city manager's office will eventually make a final assessment of the application. And if the application is approved, you'll eventually have to go through a renewal process at the end of a 12-month period. However, there is a 10-day appeals period after an application is denied for whatever reason. There is a process for a appeal, and that would be heard with the city council. That is the process as it initially stands, as it stands now. This is sort of a process in motion, so it may change, but this is what we're going to start out with, and that is our final slide. So we're ready to answer any questions, and just go ahead.
Thank you. Going back to the zoning slide where you show the blue circles. In terms of the dispensaries, first of all, do you have a cap of 4 permits you're issuing for dispensaries? Is that correct? Because it's listed in the ordinance, it's 4 dispensaries.
There is no cap on any
Okay.
licenses.
Okay, that's a wonderful thing. Okay, so on this zoning map, we're looking at OTC. Is that specifically where the dispensaries are going to be allowed, is in the OTC alone?
No, that hasn't formally been amended yet, so it's still under discussion, but we were directed by the council to amend the ordinance for OTC, but it just hasn't occurred yet. Correct?
Okay, so as far as the rest of...
Let me just add to that. Dispensaries are going to be permitted wherever in the municipal code pharmacies are permitted by right. The reason that OTC is specifically being identified is because currently pharmacies aren't permitted in the OTC, but the council is thinking of wanting to allow it in the OTC.
In terms of the rest of the map, is it the areas in red, that's the permitted use areas, or is it anywhere where there's not a blue circle?
No, the other colored areas are where dispensaries could be.
Okay, so the white areas are not allowed. If a street's there, right, it's just white.
Correct,
It's no, not allowed.
correct.
Those areas are actually the parcels, and they're highlighted based on the zoning. So that's more helpful. If you look at the key, those are the parcels that are highlighted per the zoning designation.
I noticed in the application, some sections stated that the information was not going to be disclosed. I noticed in the proposed supply chain, it did not have that same distinction. I'm wondering what in the application we can mark confidential. Some of us do have existing cultivation facilities that will be our main supply source. Under state applications, the only thing made public is a mailing address, and our actual premise is
Sir, if you could come up here, I'm sorry.
Can we mark anything on the application confidential and then have it not be publicly available? It requests the actual physical premise location for the proposed supply chain, which I'd prefer not to make public.
If there's a legal reason for the city to be able to prohibit it from being distributed, or if the state has a rule that says you can't distribute that information, then we wouldn't distribute it. So just because something isn't specifically stated as being confidential, doesn't mean it's going to get dispersed.
Okay, so then in uniformity with the state then, since they're not distributing that information, if we wrote confidential next to it, it would be determined that it will remain.
Yeah, I would suggest do that on the application, then we can review it and decide whether we think
you.
it should be or not.
That was a great question, by the way.
I have a list of several questions. The first, I think, and most important is, how is the city defining financial interest holder? Because the state defines owners and financial interest holders, but there isn't any specifics in any of the city's documents that specifies financial interest holders. And particularly if you're going to require an $1,100 for each one, I'm kind of curious to know where that threshold stops.
What we anticipate is any human being or entity that has any kind of a monetary interest in the operation is going to be considered financially interested.
Does that include the interests excluded by the state?
It may or may not.
Okay. With respect to Section H, if an investigation was conducted and concluded, but the subject of that investigation was never identified, how do you, what kind of response is expected? Essentially what I'm asking is, if somebody didn't know they were being investigated and they didn't disclose it because they didn't know, would they be penalized for that?
Someone's only going to have to put on the application information they know or should have known.
Okay.
We're not going to hold someone responsible if there's no way they would have known that they were under investigation.
Sure, there are a couple of chicken and egg questions in this application, so I just didn't want to find ourselves in a catch-22. At Section I, requires a lengthy list of those that will be engaged in the business, specifically employees, but we're kind of far out from the, I think, as a business owner would probably not have employees yet. So how do you propose applicants address all of those various categories? You know, I mean, obviously the owners and financial interest holders, those are pretty easily identified, but volunteers or contractors or even managers, I think at this point may be preliminary, particularly since we don't know how long this process is going to take.
I would suggest if at the time the application is filed, they don't know who those people would be, I wouldn't list them. As soon as they know, I would suggest sending somebody to the city so the city's aware of who it is that's going to be involved with the business.
So is the expectation the application be updated real time, or only you wouldn't need to supplement your application until it's either been approved or denied?
As soon as an applicant has the information, I would suggest give it to the city.
Okay. Does the same apply to sources of supply?
Definitely.
With respect to section P and the plans, what is the expectation for plans? Is it something you can hand draw, or would you require an architect?
It's a good question. We do not require an architect. Simple drafting, sometimes people use graphing paper. The most important thing is that it's legible and that it's accurate. We do not require it to be an architect or an engineer. There's other documents, though, that probably will require professionals, but not necessarily drawing up those sketches.
Okay, and in that same section, there's a reference to relationships to other properties. What is meant by relationship in that section?
Primarily what planning is looking for is just the adjacent land uses. So if you're next to residential, that's going to be important, especially if there's odor or if there's storage or things like that. So they're asking you questions about security. So we're primarily looking at the adjoining land uses.
And whether it's shared parking, that kind
Parking,
of
sure.
stuff.
Yeah, thank you. There's parking as well.
Okay. Section Q specifies operations and security plans, plural. So I was a little confused as to how the information requested in section Q would differ from the information requested in O, R, S, and T. I definitely understand you want a thorough application, but in instances it seems perhaps duplicative.
There may be some overlap.
Okay.
So
In section U, it asks for testing, transportation, packaging, and labeling criteria, and I can't imagine this is a competency test for the applicant. And the state requires testing, transportation, packaging, and labeling, depending on what you're doing, what license you hold. So what information is being requested there?
I don't know how to answer that other than what it says.
Do you just want to
So
cite the
maybe
code?
we need to talk outside of this, but it seemed pretty clear to me that what it wants is the information that how the testing is going to occur. And if it's going to occur based on what the state says, then that's what it's going to say.
When I read criteria, to me, it read like what's the trigger for the requirement as opposed to how are you going to conduct it.
I guess I would suggest answer it the way you think it should be answered, and then we'll deal with it when it comes in.
Okay. With respect to the property owner's statement of consent, it asks for the applicant, but in the instance where the property is owned by, for instance, a company or a trust and not the applicant, how do you want that blank completed?
The information that should be on the property owner statement is definitely the individual human being applicant, and if the applicant's business is going to be operated by an entity, and that entity is going to be the entity that enters into a lease agreement with the property owner, then that entity should also be listed.
Okay. With respect to, and I forget, I think this was in the ordinance, talked about a secured area to conduct, I guess it was transferring product of any shape or form. What it defines a secured area? And there's kind of a joke about like what the force services, the uniform services, this like securing a building. You know, the Air Force contacts the contracting squadron, you know, and they secure a building, and the Marines, you know, assault it. What is the secured area?
Again, I think it's a great question, and it's one that'll need to be answered once you submit the application and show how the area, is it going to be video security? Are you going to have an employee on the site all the time that somebody else is there? I mean, we see various ways of securing that transfer area. And just for the audience, in case you don't know, what we're talking about is if product is brought in or out, it can't come through the front door. Obviously, it's going to go through a loading dock area. How is that area going to be secured so that somebody doesn't run up and run off with a bunch of product? And there will be various ways that you'll find to do that, whether it's personnel, cameras, chain link fences. I mean, there, again, we see, card secured access with security on site in some facilities. We see some that are just solid locked rooms with a door that only opens one direction, has a camera on each side of it. So again, I think some of it will depend on what we get in the application.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure if the expectation was X, that we comply with X as opposed to like.
And we don't, my sense is the city is not trying to make this difficult for anybody. They're willing to work with you on this, but if it's not secure, you're going to find out that you're going to need to change it. You'll have an opportunity to correct that. But making it secure should not be terribly difficult, because it could be something, as I say, as simple as having somebody on-site security the entire time products being loaded or unloaded, depending on the type of facility that you have. It'll be different for a dispensary, for instance, because you'll have on-site security anyway, than it will be for manufacturing or cultivation, where you have a different loading dock situation usually.
And the ordinance itself does include some specific criteria that need to occur for security. And if it's not in that ordinance, then put it in what you think, and we can review it.
Thank you. With respect to the CIH reports that are required, are those to be submitted in advance of the local approval, or only after local approval is given? This kind of gets to the chicken and the egg question. At what point does?
That's the inspector of the hygiene that we were asking about. You want to take that? We'll get some further clarification on that and get back to you, because I'm not sure whether or not that would take place prior to or after the facility is online.
Sure. And then I know a lot of properties that are being either purchased or leased will need substantial build out. So what will be the process for permitting that activity?
Brian, is that something you want to?
Could you just repeat that with some clarity?
Sure. So if a building needs to change from the way it's currently laid out, sometimes it's just paint, and that's fine. But other times walls need to move, and I mean, in some instances, you're going to have, fire sprinkler installations, that kind of thing. So in terms of permitting that.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we're asking for a site plan and a floor plan. The floor plan should show any new walls or any new areas, or let's say you want to add on to the building. There will be instances where a development plan would be required, and it would have to go to planning commission, but you're not going to have to worry about that if you're not building new structures. But it could come into play if you're adding on, but if you're just doing inside work, it's going to need case-by-case building review to see if it needs a building permit, and then go from there. So that's one of the reasons why the floor plan is important.
And what is required through this process is not necessarily is separate from what you need to submit to building for building permits, or separate from what you need to submit to planning for a planning process.
Okay. I think that's all for now.
So we're currently developing a large open floor plan warehouse for 3 license types, manufacturing and distribution, and then we're also leasing to a testing company. As it's currently just an open floor plan, what requirements are you going to put in place for differentiating the locations? Kind of paint a stripe on the ground and say, left of this is manufacturing, right of it's distribution, and over there is testing?
And I'll start on that one, because we're seeing in Colorado literally tape on the floor in some of the dispensaries. I think we're waiting for the state to come up with a clear definition of what constitutes a separate premises. Right now, the state is tending to be very lenient on how they're defining separation of premises, whether that is a solid wall or a non-solid wall. And the city will have to kind of follow, I think, what the state does as the minimum, but they may require ultimately a stronger separation. I don't think that it's an issue that's been fully worked out yet. It's not vetted by the state. They're still debating that exact issue. As those of you who are in the industry know, they define that you must have a separate premises for each commercial activity, but defining what a separate premises constitutes, whether it is an immovable barrier or a movable barrier. These are all the kinds of things that will still need to be worked out. And of course, if it is a movable type barrier, then in your site plan, that'll have to show that that is a movable barrier so that if it changes, you already have it in place, because you don't want to be making changes to your premises once you get it started, because then you have to notify the state and reapply for your license, and locally typically too. So I guess the best answer we can come up with is let's keep an eye on what the state's doing, but in the meantime, I would suggest that more than tape or a line on the floor, you're going to need some type of a barrier that separates each premises. And you know, Brian, I don't know if you're thinking that some kind of a solid wall is better or not at this point, or...
Yeah, since we're new at this, I can't say now. I will say that, you know, if you take an existing building and you intensify, we will be looking at parking, so we just have to be careful about that. Let's say a building was just warehousing and storage, and now all of a sudden you're intensifying it with more office uses or something like that. That parking could come into play, and we would want to look at how the parking is laid out on that site plan to make sure you can accommodate parking for whatever the TI is.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, yeah, it has, we have ample parking. So in the first draft of the regulations, it said they had to have a physical immovable barrier in between premises. In the last draft, they removed that, and now it's very vague and appears to be pretty much any sort of thing you can point at. Since it's an open floor plan warehouse and we plan on growing the business over several years, paying the $1,000 to the state to reapply for the premise map isn't such a big deal compared to the millions we've already spent to get to where we are. So I guess I would prefer if it was in the most lenient case, or something that we could move with time, so I'm not building walls, tearing them down, and then building new walls every 12 months.
And again, my sense is that the city is willing to work with you on that. Probably as you submit your site plan and put in what type of walls you're going to have, I would expect the city will address that individually.
Yeah, I think there's, certainly the council has made it very clear they don't want us to have more impositions than the state does. However, we also have building codes that would also have to be taken in consideration, that the building official, we you know, that they are state codes that are mandated. So I think it's got to be that, you know, looking at both those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at using mostly like modular in-plant warehouse offices. They're easy to pop up, meet all the codes and requirements, but I guess you answered it. So it'll be a case-by-case basis, and as long as we work with you to clearly identify what those boundaries are, it's likely a good fix until the state makes some more clarification.
Did you say you were doing manufacturing?
Yes.
Volatile?
Yes.
Your barrier for volatile manufacturing will need to be
We have a
up to
C1,
code.
yeah, we have a C1, D1 facility, yeah.
Come on, you guys, that's too easy.
Hello. All right. Well, first of all, thank you guys for doing this workshop. It's a great help, so I appreciate all the time. A few questions here. In some counties that we've done licensing for, they require a local resident to be part owner or have 5% ownership into the license. Is there something like that here going on, or no?
No, there is not. There's no equity type program here in Lompoc.
And based, so kind of, I guess then that answers it, but I'll just ask to clarify. If there's no equity type, then there's no social equity thing going on either, when you asked about the litigation?
Not at this time.
Okay, awesome. Section H, where it's asking, one of the applicants has a dispensary in Los Angeles, California, and they went through IRS audits. Would that need to be listed there as part of the federal government? If it was a tax audit.
I would think it would be a good idea to put everything on there just in case it pops up. You just don't want, as an applicant reviewer, what we don't like are surprises. Even though it may not affect, you know, the processing of the application at all, it's probably good to have that information on there. Did they receive a clean audit from the IRS?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good thing to put on there.
Okay, will do. Another question is, I read in the ordinance that there will be, I guess, 1,000 feet barrier between dispensaries, correct? Did I read that, or no? Or how, like, basically what I'm asking is, how do we distinguish how many dispensaries, so there's not 10 of them right next to each other? You get my question?
There's no limitation between dispensaries. There's only limitations between dispensaries and daycare, youth centers, and schools.
Oh, okay, so I misunderstood that. Is there some sort of priority or type which these licenses will be reviewed through, or is it just first come, first served basis?
There's no limit on the number of licenses, so it doesn't matter. There isn't going to be a priority because there's no set limit being issued.
I just was asking more of like a time thing. If 200 applicants come in, do you fall first in line, or do you have to wait 2 months till your application gets reviewed?
If you're the first complete application in, you'll probably get processed first.
Awesome. All right, sounds good. I think that's all my questions for today. Do you have any?
In regards to the 1,000-foot barrier, I'm assuming that the restriction is based on property line, not the physical building itself, correct?
Yeah, it's property line to property line.
Property line to property line,
And the 1,000-foot is only for the smoking. The 600-foot is for the use.
for the actual use.
If someone were 100% compliant today and they turned in an application, checked every box, gave you all the dollars you needed, how long do you think it would be until they would get an approval?
I wish I had a good answer for that one. You know, we're ready to review and process those applications. Some of it will depend on, do we need to make a lot of phone calls to check references up to the last 5 years as stated in the application, but it should not take an inordinate amount of time. We see no delays on the application review side, and we certainly don't see the city trying to slow this process down. They're working very hard, as you can tell, to move this process along. So we want to accommodate them as quickly as we can. And those are the factors that would slow us down. If it can be done in a day, it'll be done in a day. I would suggest that it won't be done in a day. You're probably looking at probably a week to 4 weeks, depending on how much research needs to be done. If it's very little, it'll go very quickly.
And I'll just add that with any development process, the application, the more complete the application is upon submittal, the quicker, it also helps it go quicker. Because when there are a lot of things that we have to come back and say, we need clarification on this, or you missed this, then that is more time, so.
And just a reminder that this permit process or this license process is separate from building permit and planning process. So this may go faster than planning or not.
Great point.
Sorry, one more question. In regards to proposed locations, if we have a location that has multiple addresses, will you be allowing multiple uses for that particular proposed location? Let's say if the address is One Ocean and there's unit A, B, and C, will you allow multiple different types of cannabis, commercial cannabis usage for each individual unit?
Each individual unit could be a location, but they'd have to have a separate application for each unit.
Okay, very good, thank you.
They're going to get in line for their licenses. Any other questions? You guys have been great. Yeah, oh, good. We got another one here.
I had a question regarding the denial. There was a mention about the stage 1, that if something was wrong in the paperwork, you guys would notify the applicant so they can make the changes. Does that also apply to any other stages? If there's something that, are you guys gonna say, well, we're gonna deny it after stage 1 if there's any more mistakes and you have to start over? Or do you notify that, hey, you're currently in stage 2, 3, and we noticed this, you need to make a correction? How is that going to play out?
With regard to the first stage, the only reason there'd be, I don't even want to call it a denial, there'd be a returning of the application because it's not complete. Once it's complete, it starts down the process to stage 2. There wouldn't be any determination at stage 2. So it's either a complete application at stage 1, and then either you're approved or denied at the end of stage 3.
And I'm still not clear on the CIH part of the application. If we're going to be doing manufacturing, we have a building, we have not installed any equipment yet, we want to put in our application. In the application, it requires a certified health inspector to, industrial health inspector. What point does that fit into the application?
My apologies, that building couldn't be here today, because that really is a question we'd like them to be able to give you some feedback on. So that is one of those things that we were going to go ahead and get back to you on and give an update.
Okay, thank you.
And I did note that question as well.
If you put, when you put your name to the list, put CIH or something so we know it's you we need to get back to.
The question I've got is, again, with regards to the Type 9 non-storefront retail license. And also, are we talking strictly medical here in terms of the licenses, or medical and recreational?
It's both medical and recreational.
Okay. So the state requires, as far as a Type 9 license, delivery only, that you have a commercial storefront with a back door. And of course, the other dynamics of GPS on your vehicles and whatnot. So your ordinance is kind of lumping that in with a dispensary. So is Type 9 license going to be allowed if one has a commercial office space that the state is requiring?
Yeah, it'll be considered a regular dispensary, even though it is non-storefront, not open to the public. But it is still a retail type of license and considered a dispensary.
Okay. In terms of the dynamic of the license, will it be strictly for delivery within the city limit, or would it be allowed to go outside of the city limit?
Currently, if the state issues a license for you to deliver, the city can't prohibit you from delivering in other jurisdictions that allow delivery. It'll be your decision as to whether you go into any city that does not allow delivery or any county that does not allow delivery. But the city doesn't restrict where you deliver, just where you set up your business within the city limits.
I have a question regarding M licenses, M and A licenses under the Compassionate Use Act. Would that be separate and distinct regulations, or those regulations are swept away and we have new regulations? Is that what we're to understand?
If I understand the question correctly, you're allowed to hold both an M and an A license on the same premises currently, as long as it is the same commercial activity and it's allowed by the local jurisdiction, which is allowed here. That means you can apply for both an A and an M license for retail, or for cultivation, or for manufacturing, or for distribution. Testing doesn't require either because it's a standalone license type. That said, I will tell you that there are very stringent state fees associated with those license types. So you're going to pay a fee for each A and for each M license type to the state.
Follow-on question.
And a separate application for each here in the city as well.
All right, and follow-up question regarding the testing of the crop for THC. What about if it's a CBD dominant crop? What if it's CBD, not THC?
Yeah, the city doesn't have a distinguishing level of CBD or THC. Neither does the state. There's no distinction between those two. The users may have a distinction, but the city and the state don't. I hope I answered that question correctly.
Seems incongruous, but okay, that's fine.
Anything under 3%. Well, and that is changing also as we look at the levels of THC and the production of hemp. because there is hemp production that's allowed, but it is currently still being discussed in the legislature because they're trying to figure out how to handle that as well. But yeah. I'm sorry, and what he said was if it's below 3% THC, it is not considered cannabis. I'm not sure that that's the level. I thought it was a little lower than that, but I'll check the regs. You're right, yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. And for anybody here interested in industrial hemp, okay, just so we know that industrial hemp is a different discussion than what we're having as far as cannabis goes. Here we go.
Well, taxes.
However much we can get, right?
Yeah, on the cultivation side, I didn't read anything in the ordinances with regards to, at the state level, we know they tax everything, including spiders.
Okay, turn on.
So is there going to be a laid out process in terms of the amount of tax on the cultivating side, or is it just straight regular retail states to sales tax?
Right now, taxing is still under discussion. Of course, you have the 15% state excise tax. You have the $9.25, $2.75, and $1.29 on dry and wet weight cannabis cultivation tax. And you have sales and use tax for anybody that doesn't have a state-issued ID card. So the doctor's script doesn't exempt you from that as a medicinal patient. That does not mean that the city will not levy its own tax. That will have to be approved. If there in fact is a tax, will have to be approved by the voters of the city. Any tax has to be voted on. Do you want to take that, Joe?
Yeah, and just following up, and at the March 20th council meeting, there's going to be a discussion of the options that are available to the council for the council to decide what level of tax they want, or even if they want to have a tax, and if there is a tax, it'll be placed on the November ballot.
And what is the application fee?
It's $10,900, $11,900 plus $1,100 for each applicant or person who has an interest.
Great question.
Yeah, and making clear, it's a deposit, because as the city is processing it, if the cost to the city is more than that amount of money, then you're going to have to deposit more to cover the city's costs.
And if it's less, then you get the money back.
All fees are what we call Proposition 26 compliant. Proposition 26 requires that there be justification for any fee that's charged, as opposed to a tax, which is approved by the voters.
Will the city be making, or be transparent with how they allocate those costs to justify the expenses above and beyond the initial deposit?
They definitely will, and they always are.
Will they have a process in place to be able to identify those expenses, so that as a applicant, we'd be able to review, additional requests for, to increase our deposit that we've already made?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so when submitting the application for a dispensary, Section I for business operations, it says type of commercial cannabis to be conducted. We would put A for adult, and then submit pretty much a duplicate application with M, Class A and M, is what I'm asking, because the dispensary should be selling medical and adult. But you just said there was a separate application would have to be processed.
Go ahead, I'll let you answer that, John.
For Lompoc, a dispensary is a dispensary. It doesn't matter whether it's a medical dispensary or in a medical and adult or just an adult. So it'd be one application for a dispensary.
Thank you.
Okay.
It would probably be a good idea if you put in your application, it's for adult and medical, or for adult for medical, just so we have the information, but it's still going to be one application and one license.
So in the instance that a cultivator was growing cannabis for medical and for adult use, you want 2 applications? Or manufacturing or distribution or whatever, you want an A application and an M application? I don't know why either. I totally agree with that assessment.
It could be one, if it's a cultivation, it'll be one application for whatever can be cultivated, whether it's medical or if it's manufacturing, it's one application for manufacturing, whether it's adult manufacturing or medical manufacturing.
Okay, so there...
But I would suggest that you put in the application what it's for, and you're going to have to put your state license anyway, so we're going to know it's 2.
Sure. No, I just think that, at least based on the question, it sounded like we just needed clarity in terms of having 2 separate licenses, or 2 separate applications for commercial operations that would do both adult and medical. So it sounds to me like the answer is just one.
And the reason is because the state requires a separate one for each one. So we're not, just so everybody knows, and we really want to clarify this for everybody, the state requires a separate application for adult and for medical. So if you're a cultivator, you're doing both, you have to supply 2 applications. The city is saying that is not necessary. You can submit 1 application. It could be for adult and medicinal.
Although, when you submit your application, there may be additional things you'd have to put in if it was for medical, or different things you'd have to put in. So it may be easier for you if you submitted 2, because then you wouldn't have confusion, but that leaves up to the applicant. Right.
Well, you guys are telling us that we only have to file 1. The state says we have to file 2, and then for recreational and medical use, I have to have my own interest for medical, I have to have my own interest for recreational, I have to have my own showroom. But you guys are telling us to apply with just 1. Isn't that going to affect us with the state?
It shouldn't. As long as you have a local license that shows that you're permitted for an A and an M license, you should be able to go to the state and ask for either an A or an M license. So if you're approved for both by the city, you'll be able to apply for either from the state. The state just wants to make sure that the city's allowing it. If the city's saying 1 application fee for an M and an A license, then the state will say, that's fine, you just pay us twice, 1 for an A license, 1 for an M license.
It's working? All right. My question relates to the state's current temporary licenses. So is there going to be a temporary approval process, or do we have to wait until the application is gone through all departments, been fully vetted, and has its final approval, and then we can apply for a temporary license with the state? Or, because other cities are giving temporary approval prior to the final application being approved for the annual application with the state. So just wondering, is there going to be a process for that or not?
As a consultant, my advice to the city would be not to issue a temporary license, but to wait until that approval process is complete. Because if you issue a temporary license and don't pass completely, and you've got a state license, then the city is in the awkward position of notifying the state that that license needs to be revoked. I don't think you want to issue that license in the first place, rather than having to go back and revoke it later on. But that will be a decision that the city will have to make.
And there has been no decision on the city's part to issue temporary. It's 1 license.
Hopefully that won't delay the licenses too far down the line, but the intent is to make sure that, while we move quickly on this process, we move thoroughly on it. We don't want to have to keep going back and forth and having these awkward conversations with the state or with you as business people.
And the one thing the city did do to sort of avoid the chicken and egg situation, the city will issue a license if you don't have a state license, but the license won't be operative, so you can't use it until you get your state license.
It's a great point, and there are not many cities that do that.
We have to be completely built out in order to have your license submitted, or will you go through your process with all your planning documents and be issued the license, or will you have to go through the final approval, not approval process, but inspection process to come look at your facility?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that question.
You could obtain the cannabis license without everything being completed in terms of your planning process and your building process and your building being built. However, there's a section in the ordinance that says, but you really won't be able to use that license until you've gotten your final inspection for all the improvements you're doing, and that's all been signed off on.
But if there's a separate planning process and you go to submit for a building permit, they wouldn't issue a building permit until the planning process is complete. So that's important just to note.
But so once you have a completed application and you're completely approved, you'll be given the license. The license will be issued. Now you won't be able to operate, but with that license you'll be able to apply to the state. They'll approve you under what you guys have put in front of them, and then at that point we would start building out. But we could apply for the state license immediately after that approval and start build out. I guess that's the question.
Yes, but hearing your question, we may end up having two license forms. One license form may be absolutely, and the other license form may be, but it's sort of conditional until things get approved. So, I'm not sure, but the cannabis license process isn't going to be slowed down because of the building and planning process, but they have to come together at some point, and so the city will have to retain some authority if they don't come together to do something about the cannabis license.
Well, when are you accepting applications?
Today. You have one today?
My question relates to the commercial utility application and being able to pay the electric bill. I've had a number of buildings leased for months, and I haven't been able to get the utilities put in my name, and that's because of don't have a business tax certificate. And so has the city addressed that issue yet? Because I'm still having to pay my landlord directly, and he's getting a little tired of that. So
the city clerk's right.
We have addressed it. If you are willing to sign a statement that says that you're not opening up a cannabis shop at this point, and it's just for either tenant improvement or cleaning or painting.
Build out process,
then,
yeah.
And you understand that you are still required to go through planning and building for any of the permits that are required, then yes, we can sign off on the commercial utility application.
Great. Can I get that today? Just kidding. It's fine.
You can meet me.
answered my question.
You can meet me at my counter after this, yeah?
Thank you so
I was wondering if Lompoc's going to require anything that goes above what the state requires as far as location, like as far as a dispensary, if we're going to need, let's say, a waiting lobby screening checking room type thing, or what specifications is Lompoc going to want?
The council made it clear that the council doesn't want to impose any restrictions more restrictive than what the state requires.
Okay, so follow state guidelines and we should be okay with Lompoc.
Right.
Thank you.
Are we to understand that Are we to understand that all cultivation within the city limits must be indoors?
Yes, you are to understand that because that's what the rule is.
Right, right. And is there are there specific engineering criteria for the greenhouse that they may be in, that this operation may be in?
We don't have a representative here from the building department, but that would be a very important question to ask them, the specifications for the greenhouse for cultivation indoors.
And I'll add on to that, we're working with cities like Santa Clara and Shasta Lake that have their own power sources, and they still don't have the infrastructure to provide for all the cultivators that are looking to apply in those areas. So if you're doing indoor cultivation, I would warn you to make sure that you check with the public utility here. It's Southern California Edison, I believe.
No, it's us. It's
Yeah,
Lompoc.
their own. Then I would check to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place to provide the amount of lights that is required, because as you know, indoor growing requires a tremendous amount of light. And the same thing will be true with your wastewater treatment and also with your water usage. Make sure that is not the city's responsibility, nor is it the state's. It's yours as a business owner to explore that. It could take years to build out some of the infrastructure for some of the indoor growing that we see in different areas.
So then are we to believe then that greenhouses cannot be made of plastic or glass?
Is that something the fire chief maybe could address?
Excuse me, sir. Would you mind repeating?
I would say they would have to be above and beyond a greenhouse, because you have to abate the smell too, and I don't believe a greenhouse will allow the smell to be abated because it'll go through the plastic and everything like that. It has to be out of view. It'd have to be behind solid walls or a fence of some sort. It can't be in clear view of the public.
Here you go.
Can a greenhouse be in a designated residential neighborhood outside the blue prohibited zones?
The greenhouses have to be in an industrial area, so no, it cannot be in a residential area. I mean, cannabis period can't be in a residential area, so you need to look at the appropriate zoning regulations for the greenhouse use. I believe it's the I, only the I.
If you look in the ordinance in 1640, under 9.36110, it says, "No person shall conduct cannabis cultivation as a commercial cannabis business unless it is within a fully enclosed structure. The enclosure may be by means of a mixed light building, provided that filters and venting systems are designed, installed, maintained, and operated specifically to prevent cannabis odors from escaping through the openings of the mixed light buildings." So it does look like there is some mixed light usage allowed within the ordinance itself, as long as you follow the rules in the ordinance and with the local zoning restrictions.
And the two districts that it's permitted in is the industrial district and the business park district.
I'm a little confused on the 11,900 for the application and then the 1,100 for the each applicant. Which part you say is any of that, if say you get denied, or is any of it refundable or non-refundable, or how does that work?
If the application is denied and all the deposit hasn't been used because of city costs, then yes, it's refundable within 60 days of the denial.
The deposit is the 11,900 or the 1,100? All of it?
The amount that was not used, whether it was for the applicant or for the application itself.
Okay, okay.
And not all of it, the amount that wasn't used.
Staff charges time against that, so however, okay.
Great question. All right, anybody else with any other questions? You guys have been great. Oh, we got another question, okay.
You just mentioned that, what did you call the structure, that light?
Mixed light?
Mixed light. And mixed light, is that what we see in the standard greenhouses, basically? Is a mixed light kind of structure?
Correct. A mixed light uses a combination of artificial light and natural sunlight to grow. It is much more environmentally friendly typically because you don't use as much electricity. But there have to be restrictions on it so that you don't have, a glass building where anybody who walks by can, break it out and grab plants. I mean, the idea is, and as a business owner, you're not going to want that anyway. You're going to want to, what I see typically are permanent structures with either translucent or transparent roofs, or roofs that will open at certain times. And then the state has definitions on different levels of mixed light, how many watts you're allowed to use per square foot is how they define it, and that is in the CDFA regulations. So if you go to the Department of Food and Agriculture's website, CanACAM, I believe it's called, CanACAN, they have the definition of what those restrictions are to qualify for mixed light. Because even though you qualify for mixed light here, if you exceed those, you won't be able to get a state license for mixed light. That defeats the whole purpose. So keep an eye on that if you're going mixed light.
So the structures that we see, these hoop structures, let's say you could enclose them and you could deal with the smell abatement. Would those qualify potentially?
Probably not. I would think that that would be something that would be too easily broken into, especially in the city limits. We see those structures more in the county areas with setbacks from any other land use in ag areas as opposed to in public agencies that are cities and city limits.
Yeah, the hoop structures are primarily for the outdoor uses. You see them all over, but they're outdoor. They just, that top covering, but I don't think you could make that into an indoor structure.
Sure. So building, though, a temporary grow operation, I mean, with a permanent structure, that's going to be pretty onerous. I'm wondering if there's some building systems out there that you've seen that accommodate this, that would conform to your criteria.
When we were in Coalinga, there were several people that had contracted to have those types of building structures done. I don't know how much they were. I do know that it started about 1.5 years ago, and they still haven't been erected at this point. And whether that's a delay by the city in processing or whether the structures themselves take a long time to build, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it seems like it would be pretty, I mean, it wouldn't be difficult if you look at modular construction to create something like that. So interesting. Thank you.
I'll get to you next.
As far as Ag 2 properties, you guys going to be going with the Board of Superiors land use, or you guys have your own?
I'm sorry, I missed that question too.
So Ag 2 properties will be falling under county, right? We don't have to.
Yeah, that's, work with me on the exact property you're looking at, but I'm not familiar with that actually
I'll
being.
get with you, person.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so my next question is, on the legal description, APN, right underneath it, it also says existing land use of proposed location. And again, on the bottom, existing zoning of property. If we're not making any changes to that center, would they all be the same? And that's the very beginning of the application, right underneath proposed location.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
Okay, my question is, what is the APN?
It's the assessor's parcel number.
Okay. An existing zoning of property and the one right above it, existing land use of proposed location, being that we're not changing anything, those would be the same, correct? Or am I wrong?
The first item, existing land use in the proposed location, is what the general plan says that site is supposed to be, and existing zoning is whatever the zoning is, whatever district that property is in.
Okay.
What exactly is the deposit for? And if you're accepted, is there any more fees after that?
The purpose of the deposit is so that the city has a 100% cost recovery on the cost that it incurs for processing, reviewing, observing the cannabis use, whether it's the application permit, it's the personnel costs, consulting costs. That's what the deposit is to cover. And I'm sorry, what was the second question? Oh.
Will there be any other fees if you're accepted?
There could be, because annually there's going to be a review, and unless there's sufficient money left in the deposit, the original deposit has been used, then you'll have to deposit again an amount of money to cover the city's costs.
And additionally, the council will be making some decisions about whether or not to take a tax to the ballot and any monitoring fees in the future.
And you'll need a business tax certificate too.
And don't forget there are state fees associated with it as well.
And the planning fees and the building fees are in addition to the $11,900.
This is, I will tell you now, this is not a cheap business to start. This is, be very careful as you vet this business. Remember, it's federally still illegal too.
That's a really good point. You'd think that with the amount of money available to the federal government, right? Because taxes, we're all paying taxes. Is there any prognostication or anybody having any forecast? Will Jeff Sessions show up here in Lompoc and we'll see him maybe land at the airport and confiscate somebody's business? Or what do you think is going to happen?
He has not applied for a business license yet.
I suggest ask him.
So the 11,000, the deposit, is that for the application as well? Like the actual the actual permit? Okay.
The answer was yes. One in the very back there.
Right, so I'm thinking about the greenhouse at Laurel and A. That seems to be right smack dab in the buffer zone. It's already zoned for ag, so are all these buffer zones cast in stone, or can there be areas parceled out of these blue zones, these blue prohibited zones, as long as the structure is a greenhouse and as long as it's zoned as a greenhouse?
The council has decided that they're going to follow the state guidelines and rules regarding buffer zones. So anything within 600 feet of any of those uses is not going to be allowed to get a license in Lompoc.
Is it 600 feet or 1,000 feet?
1,000 feet is, smoking can't occur in the 1,000
okay.
feet.
Right.
It's the use itself is 600 feet.
And that particular property is not an ag zone, it's an industrial zone, but because of the proximity to the field that's used primarily for youth, it is not an option for cannabis.
What?
All right, is that it? Well, we appreciate your input. As always, I learned something from these discussions. We'll follow up with the CIH, see if we can answer that gentleman's question. Otherwise, If you're interested in doing this, we encourage you to begin the process. Thank you all for your
Wait,
time.
before everybody leaves, please, do you guys understand what we need for the application to be presented to the clerk's office? We need 1 original signed, 3 hard copies, and then 1 on a PDF provided to us on a jump drive or a thumb drive. So we're asking you to go to the website, complete the application, print it, sign it, make 3 copies of that, hand that to me, and then that PDF that you filled out online, put that on a jump drive, and then hand that to me as well.
Thank you.
If all our supplemental documents, take up more space than what's provided on the application, can we submit like a, a binder that has everything organized for everybody? Okay, great. Oh, all right, great, thank you.
Thank you. If any other questions are to arise within the next couple weeks, how can we come in contact with anybody here, or who do we ask?
Contact information is all on the website for pretty much all of the staff here, so feel free to call or email any of us. Thank you, everybody.